Hello, 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 and welcome to the living room, the place where intimate conversations are life changing. I'm your host, Juliet Davis, and we are so glad that you are able to tune in with us today. This is a show that I'm excited about sharing. It's something that I've been talking about for a while because I recognize how important mental health is to our community and of course to our nation, and let me just say really even broader to our world. With the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen so many instances where mental health, mental illness has come to the forefront. And so I wanted to do a show about it just to touch bases and deal with some of the issues that I know people are challenged with. And so the living room, as I said, is that place where intimate conversations are life changing. And so we often like to bring people into the living room and pull up a chair and just talk about, issues that I believe are relevant and real. Our commitment in the living room is to encourage you and to empower you. Those are the two things that you're going to get every time you tune in to the living room. So, by way of housekeeping, before I introduce our special guest today, I do want to say to you guys that if you'd like to learn more about the living room, or if you have any questions or anything that you'd like to share, please feel free to check me out on social media. Here on Facebook under Juliet Davis Ministries or Juliet Davis, or you can find me on Instagram under true_journey. You can also send me an email at destinyempower@gmail.com. Either of those ways, I will be glad to respond and look forward to hearing from you, especially after today's show. So, let me introduce to you our special guest today. It is none other than Tamra Jones. She is indeed a special gift to me. Full disclosure, she's family, but she is someone who has endeavored to perfect her ability to do what she does in the area of counseling. So let me give you a little bit about her credentials. She's a licensed professional counselor specializing in helping clients with heightened anger and relational issues. She's passionate about helping others heal from traumatic relationships and also identifying emotional triggers so that they can not just be identified, but hopefully to reduce and eliminate them. And she helps others just to enjoy healthy relationships, both personally and professionally. And so, with that, let me welcome to the living room Tamra Jones.
Hello, hello,
Hello,
hello. Thank
Tamra.
you for having me here.
Wonderful. Well, it is good to have you here. This issue of mental health and mental illness is probably in the news pretty much every day in some shape or form. When we talk about what's going on in our school system, when we talk about what's going on in our workplace, and certainly what's going on at home, it just seems like the triggers, if you will, are on just a short fuse. And so I think that we as a community, in the larger sense, have come to the place where we really have to be more knowledgeable about mental health and mental illness. And so I thought it would be a good thing to do if we would just start there. Talk to us about mental health, mental illness. Help us with some definitions as well.
Well, mental illness is a condition which causes serious disorders that affect your mood, your behavior, or your thinking, right? So oftentimes we all struggle with it from time to time, but if it causes frequent stress in those areas, it leads to the depression, the anxiety, and the schizophrenia, like the eating disorders, all of those addictive behaviors that you often hear about. So, it's something that we often deal with. We none of us are exempt from it, but it's just figuring out how you manage it when it comes up.
Wow. Okay. So when it comes to relationships, because that's kind of how we are tying those two topics together. What is it about the mental health, mental illness that obviously impacts relationships. And we're talking broadly. We're not just talking about, romantic relationships. We're talking about all scopes, all types of relationships.
Correct. Yes. So oftentimes it's just being able to lean on that community, right? At one point everybody was connected, depending on where you came from. Community was a big thing. Like they often said it takes a village to raise a kid. That's evident. But oftentimes people have kind of withdrawn and kind of, especially during the pandemic, a lot of people were left
Mhm.
to their own devices and not really knowing that sometimes people develop this avoidant behavior when things get too hectic within or their personal issues. They develop this avoidant behavior and get real busy in other areas, something that they can control, right? The whole
Mhm.
while ignoring this one thing that they really need to be able to address because they feel out of control in some of those different areas. And sometimes that affects relationships. Often your thoughts affect your relationships because you may be misinterpreting something. And without
Mm.
effective communication or without even making an attempt to try to get clarity on something, you just run with an idea. If you felt offended, you just run with it as if it's facts. And you are running off on a misunderstanding. And definitely that impacts relationships. That impacts your peers, your colleagues that you work with, the people that you encounter on a day to day. So it's really important to be able to check those thoughts because sometimes you jump to conclusions. Sometimes you think that you can predict the future. Sometimes people think that they overgeneralize from a single event. They just
Mhm.
assume that, okay, this has happened before, so this will always happen. You know,
Right.
also blaming yourself for something, assuming that you have more control over a situation than you actually do. Also being able to think about the worst case scenario, catastrophizing, if you will, just always assuming the worst case and you're just bracing yourself for that. And it doesn't really allow you to be present for what's going on. So even though nothing is actually happening, you're anticipating that all the time. So it always keeps you on edge. So that leads to the anxiety, that leads to the depression, like the emotional reasoning. I feel fear, so I should be afraid, right? But not really taking the time to check those particular thoughts. And so it does interfere with the relationships because now you're going off of assumptions. Sometimes you're not comfortable being around people because you're always thinking that people are judging you.
Hmm.
And so you're standoffish. And, it's just a lot of things that mind can do. And if you don't get that in check, it could just take you to some really dark places and you go within. And so you're just separated from everybody. And now you're just in this inner chaos.
Wow, you have covered a lot of ground in a short period of time, and I feel like we have to unpack some of that which you have just shared. The first thing that caught my attention was when you said that your thoughts. I have encountered so many conversations with people who have been challenged with overthinking. I
Yeah.
think you and I talked earlier, and you called them thought traps,
Hmm.
where you, as you described it, you get an assumption, you make a conclusion from a chain of events, and you run with it. And so then what happens is, you're walking around thinking that, one and one equals two, and in fact, it's nothing about that adds up in reality. But you have determined that is in fact the case. So how does a person deal with that? What kinds of things would you recommend for someone who finds themselves in that predicament more times than not?
Hmm. I think it's important to just really be able to stop and evaluate those thoughts, understanding that just because a thought arises does not make it facts. Some people think, okay, it came up, so it must be true, and we're just operating in that truth, not recognizing like there's nothing truth about it. That's completely deceptive. So just being able to take a step back and just figuring out, okay, like this thought comes to mind. Let me identify any emotions that come to, any emotions that I'm experiencing as a result of that thought, right?
Mhm.
How deep are these emotions? And from there, being able to assess the thought, is there any evidence that supports this particular thought, right? And if so, you'd be able to kind of create that evidence, make it known, right? But if it's not, you have to ask yourself, is there any evidence against this? And if it's not, then you have to really be able to take a step back and to reframe it. It's like, how can I reframe this thought to something that's more productive? Right. So
Mm.
instead of just assuming, you may have walked into work one day and somebody looked at you crazy. You said good morning and somebody didn't even acknowledge you. And you have taken that completely personal, right? It was like, well, I knew she didn't like me. You probably already had this in your mind, like the person was already judging you for things that they don't even know about in your past, right? And so you're operating with that. And so now you're just looking for evidence to support this. And so one bad off day, you're thinking, oh, I knew this person didn't like me. Oh, and you have all these things that kind of you create to make that to be true, not even taking the time to recognize this person may be they may have just gotten some bad news this morning. It has nothing to do with you, right? But now you're going around with a chip on your shoulder and you see the person a week later, you won't speak to them because you created some animosity that wasn't even there, right?
Okay, so let me interrupt you. Let me interrupt you right there. Now, that scenario is very believable, very real. Is that what you would define as mental illness, or would you call that something where someone has, a tendency or a proclivity that they need to bring under, some closer scrutiny and work through it? What would you call that?
So I will say that contributes to the anxiety, right? So that's the anxiety
Hmm.
happening. We all experience it, right? So there are
Hmm.
certain levels of anxiety that work to our benefit because it motivates us to get things done sometimes, but when it's getting out of hand and you have no control over it, that's when it's, a disorder that's causing stress in your life. And it's definitely having an impact and interfering with your ability to just really just do what you need to be able to focus on. So we all deal with it on certain, levels. But when it's out of hand and you're not able to reframe that thinking process on your own, then it's definitely time to get some support to get that skill building to help you manage it. So it's not
Right,
something
right.
that you have to deal with forever, but it's just sometimes just learning how to work through that. Because oftentimes you can get so caught up in your head, nobody even knows that you're dealing with it. So no one
There,
has the
that
opportunity.
part.
Yeah. So nobody has the opportunity to kind of guide you and give you the support with what you need. You just often think that you're in this all alone. And before you know it, you have withdrawn. It's me against the world type of situation. Nobody understands me. Or, this one particular incident has happened. I'm doomed for life. Nothing good ever happens to me. Like all of these different types of thoughts that are, distorted. But when you hold them to be true, that can lead to the depression. That can lead to a lot of different other things. So it's
Right.
really one simple thing about managing those thoughts will help you really be able to get control of your life.
Wow. Now, I'm a big proponent of journaling, and I encourage people to get it out of here and down on paper just because, you have limited space. And a lot of
Yeah.
times, if you have a lot of thoughts and they're crowding and crowding and they keep adding up, then you don't really have the ability to kind of sort through them. So I encourage people to journal, because it's therapeutic. You quiet yourself, it gives you some me time to kind of, really do an honest assessment of the day or of the event that you felt in particular, was challenging for you. And so I think that that's one way a person could work through, those thought traps. But it also occurs to me that if you have had a bad experience, someone, betrayed your trust, and you've had that happen more than once, then the first time that you see any sign of that, you're immediately drawing that conclusion that this is that.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask you that, to ask you to speak to that, because I know of a lot of scenarios where people deal with trust issues,
Right.
and they're trying, to be fair and objective and to give everybody an opportunity to, you know, prove themselves to be, trustworthy. But inevitably something will happen, and then what? They get triggered. So speak to us about that.
I think it's important to understand, like, when you experience a different level of betrayal or pain, it's important to work through that, work to resolve it, right? Because if you don't, that just follows you from one situation to another. So you keep experiencing the same thing, right? Not really recognizing that you're creating the same circumstances because this is what's going on in your head. And then before you know it, you're blaming somebody for things that they not necessarily doing. And that gets old really quickly. So that wears and tears on a relationship, whether it's a friendship, an intimate relationship, a family member, it's a wear and tear. And, when people create that distance, it goes into this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like nobody cares. Everybody abandons me anyway. They're all thinking badly of me, and so when you have that negative self-talk, you anticipate everybody else is talking about you the same way. You think that everybody else is having those same thoughts about you. And so it just really becomes an overwhelming experience. And so that's why it's really important, if you experience that level of betrayal or pain, it's important to sit with yourself, figure out like what happened, how do you move through it? And if it's something that's too complex for you to understand, it will benefit you to seek some support to kind of work through that and understand, like, because oftentimes people can come from a situation and they're eternally a victim. They choose to be a victim. This is always happening to me, without even recognizing how you can show up in relationships differently. You could show up in a way with the boundary setting, right? You show up with a way that you can impact whether or not you need to walk away from a situation that's not, being beneficial to you. So it's important to recognize that we can't always just succumb to the victim mindset, but you have to be able to recognize, how did you show up? How did you contribute to the problem? If that's because sometimes we contribute to stuff and we won't own that.
Oh yeah. We contribute to stuff and don't own it. That's absolutely right. And the thing about it is, what we don't own up to is how our reaction or our response or our actions created something unintentional, nevertheless, created something that then caused a chain reaction to occur. And
Correct.
we don't want to own up to that. We only want to talk about what the other person did, and not so much what did we do. And so, when we talk about relationships, it just seems to me that a couple things. One is, that people feel a certain amount of pressure to be in relationships. And so they're more willing to tolerate stuff that they know, is a problem. We were laughing earlier about the meme that I posted to promote this session today. And it was just, the therapist said, "Didn't you see the red flags?"
Right. Yeah.
and the little monkey was just kind of looking down like, I thought it was a carnival.
Right.
So, we are often guilty of overlooking, sweeping stuff under the rug, making excuses, rationalizations for things because we don't want to deal with them, because there are other variables at work, like feeling the need to be in a relationship, or feeling that, your clock is ticking, and all these other reasons for why we tolerate stuff. And so I think it is important that we are honest with ourselves. And I want to hear from you regarding that. Like, what is it that you can do to hold yourself accountable for really being true to yourself about what is it about this relationship that's continuing to resurface, and what's the reality of the success of the relationship when you've got this going on all the time?
Right. So I think it also goes back to accountability, right? So recognizing those patterns, because if you're experiencing the same situation with everybody around you, you have to recognize you definitely play a part in that situation, right? So recognize you, right? So you can't just go around thinking everybody you encounter is having the same problem with you, right? So I think it's important to just be able to recognize those patterns. And if you see that, sometimes it's hard because, if you look at yourself in the mirror every day, you see the same thing. You don't necessarily notice the changes that come along gradually, right? Until you see yourself in a picture, you're like, oh my goodness, look at that weight. Or, when did I get this gray? The stuff you see every day, but because it happens gradually and you see it every day, you don't recognize it. right?
Mhm.
So it's then being able to just really talk to somebody who can see you objectively and just really be able to give you some insight, because oftentimes there are different types of attachment styles that people adapt to. Depending on their childhood experiences or their personal life experiences that actually contribute to how you attach yourselves. People with anxious attachment may have felt like they were neglected emotionally, or they may have felt
Mhm.
like their parents were so busy doing other things that they didn't get the attention that they felt that they needed. They may have looked at somebody else getting more attention that they were, and so they didn't feel valued. And so now they walk around with this anxious attachment. So they're just gravitating to people who are emotionally unaware, emotionally unavailable to them, right? So you
Mhm.
keep getting these patterns because you keep gravitating to people who can't give you what you need. And so
Mm.
it's like you display yourself as being needy, right? I don't know if you've heard people was like, I love hard. You're not really
Mhm.
recognizing that's really in the that's the anxious attachment at play, because it's like, yeah, you may be loving hard because you're doing all of the things without paying attention. If you're not getting them in return, you don't need to continue to invest your time in those places that you're not getting the time, affection, and attention that you actually desire, right? That you also have the avoidant attachment. That's the person who just goes on and they are, I talked about it earlier, they busy themselves doing other things so that they don't have to
Mm.
deal with this real crisis that's going on in their personal life. And that shows up in their relationships, because it's like if things become too overwhelming in their relationship, you just kind of create this distance, and you have a person
Mhm.
running after you. It's like, okay, you don't call me enough, you don't spend enough time. And if that's overwhelming, you're ghosting them, so to speak. Not necessarily that you
Uh-huh.
want to, but those are the patterns that happen. And so now you're walking around with this label. And then that's when you tend to operate, well, this is what's expected of me, so this is just what I'm going to do, right? So not really recognizing, if you don't check those behaviors early on, you do live a life with those patterns, and you just operate off of a misunderstanding. You're accepting a label that doesn't necessarily have to be your situation, but you can be
Mhm.
proactive to figure out, what can I do to change this? Because you definitely have the opportunity to change to a secure attachment, which means you are able to recognize that when you need to take care of yourself, you can create the distance to take care of yourself, and you know how to connect without having all of
Mhm.
these troubling thoughts going on in your head, and thinking that you're about to be abandoned, or no one cares about you, or thinking that you are unlovable, and all the types of those things. Because you'll be surprised on a day to day, like how many people do well in their careers, who do well in their education, who do well in
Uh-huh.
life in general. They struggle in those relationships just because of all of that stuff that's there, that's unaddressed, that people don't really know how this impacts these other areas, that are out of their control in their mind.
Wow. Wow. And that's a lot that you share, because I can see how each one of those situations would play out in a way, especially if the person with the anxious attachment, is not getting what they need, and yet they're still gravitating towards this pattern. And so it makes me wonder two things, and I know we're about to wrap up, but two things that I'm curious about. The first is, do you think it would be healthy then that as you embark on this relationship, that you have an accountability partner? But I say that with a lot of caution, because it really would mean that you would have to find the right kind of person. So for instance, if you find somebody who's been wounded, and who doesn't, has trust issues and all that, and that person is your accountability partner, where you're going to be in trouble, because their perspective is going to be, pretty
Excuse me.
well
Sure.
tainted, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Then on the other hand, I recognize that, the process of talking through something with someone who can really be honest with you about, your thought processes, and sometimes we can be very critical, very judgmental, and it's somebody who, can really call you out on that stuff, right? That to me seems like that would be helpful as you're going into a relationship, especially because you want to make sure that you're not self-sabotaging the opportunity to be in a healthy relationship. And I contend that a whole lot of us do that because we've not had a healthy relationship. So therefore, we only
Mhm.
know the things that are not healthy. And
Yeah.
that's unfortunate
Mhm.
as well.
Mhm. I think it's important to, like, if you that's something that you desire, it's important to surround yourself with people who are in the healthy relationships, right? Because if you're surrounding
Mhm.
yourself with people who are bitter about their own relationships, they don't really have a whole lot to contribute to you outside of that
Right,
negativity, right? And
right.
so when you encounter challenges, like all relationships do, they're like, oh, you need to leave that person alone because this the XY, because this is my situation. Every situation, it doesn't have to replicate whatever they experienced, right? So
Mhm.
making sure you're intentional about surrounding yourself about people who have a healthy view on relationships. And sometimes that's
Yes.
not everybody's situation. So sometimes they didn't have good models in their home, about the relationships, whether it was a really violent, abusive relationship, or whether it was a one parent household. Some of those things that really play a great deal in people, how they show up in relationships. Because some people tend to spend so much time and effort. It was like, I don't want to be like whatever this person did for me. They
Right.
blame a parent for all of these things, but they tend to put all of this energy on what they don't want to do, that they don't take the time to gravitate towards something that they want. And so all of
Mhm.
that negative energy is still very present, and they still end up carrying out the same behavior that they are trying to avoid because they haven't replaced it with something more positive, right? So because I specialize in couples therapy, or relational therapy, a lot of people gravitate towards me that know they're experiencing social anxiety. They know that they can show up socially awkward. We just work through it. Sometimes it's just not about, okay, something has to be wrong in all these areas, but sometimes it helps to just really talk through some things, get a healthy perspective, and just
Mhm.
and that leads you to that accountability piece to figure out, okay, how do I show up in this space without making it bigger than what it has to be, and just really being present for it without
Mhm.
anticipating. It's like some people at hello, they're already trying to walk down the aisle or something. It's like they have the expectations.
They picking out a dress. Oh yeah.
Without taking the time to know somebody. Just because somebody expressed interest in you doesn't mean y'all are necessarily a good match. And I think that's a lot of what people endure sometimes. Like, okay, I want a relationship. Oh, I want a relationship too, without really
Mhm.
taking time to vet the person to see if y'all are compatible or not.
Right.
Because
Right. And
sometimes
it's
you
and
can.
I want to say, too, as I listen to you talk about, at hello, I mean that they already, down the aisle. It's that, we have lost the art of being friends first.
Correct. Yeah.
So we accelerate and advance relationships prematurely,
Yeah.
so that we don't have that time to really get to know that person without all of the pressures of, oh, this is my boo, and
Hmm.
and all of that I think complicates things. I think if you keep it, on a friendship plateau for real, I ain't talking about like friends with privileges. I'm not talking about
Right.
that
Yeah.
because that's complicated. But I'm
Yeah.
saying, to the degree that you can get to know that person without all of the hangups, I think you're much better off. And I would say, too, that as a friend, as you're getting to know that person, then some of the things that you really want to get to know about them, but some things you want to get to know about yourself will
Yes.
come to the forefront, and you'll be able to work through them in a much better place to work through them than if you got all of this other, that's mixed in with it now, and now it's like I said, it's complicated.
Right. Yeah. And like you said earlier, I think it's all about having that inner, because this is something that's from within that you want, not allowing all these external pressures. Because society will tell you, will have all type of judgment if you're still single at a certain age, or family was like, when you're going to get married, when you're going to have this child. So you have all these external pressures that give you some timeline that doesn't even fit what you have going on for your specific life. There is no one formula that fits all, right? We all have our own unique experiences. So I think it's important to recognize that and just go according to what works best for you. When you can do that, I
Hmm.
think that puts everybody in a good space so they don't have to feel rushed into situations that don't make sense. Sometimes it's unhealthy, sometimes it's detrimental, but we just set people up for that when we have too much opinions about other people's situations. Like, you have enough going on, each of us have enough going on in our own personal lives that will keep us busy you know, but the people say I'm minding my business and drinking my water, you know, so just you have
Right.
to work on for yourself without having to worry about everybody else. Because oftentimes that's a distraction from you focusing on what you need to be doing for your own self.
Right, right, right. I've heard it said this way: I have 6 months to mind my business and 6 months to leave other people's business alone.
Alone.
So
Correct.
that's your year right there, right?
Right.
I
Right.
want to also, before we go, it occurs to me that one of the other challenges is the person who is in the serial relationship person, who is going from one relationship to the other, and they don't take the time to really get, to do the work to deal with their issues, and they take, that to the next relationship.
Right.
And I have always felt like, you really need to set some boundaries and say, for this season, or until I'm at a better place, I'm going to take some time to get myself together so I can be better to me, and I can be better in the relationship. Whenever that next relationship comes, I'm
Right.
going to be better because I'm
Mhm.
going to take the time now to do that.
Yeah. And I think it's really just about changing your perspective, because some people feel like they don't have value unless they're in a relationship. So that's why
Mm,
they're always forcing these particulars, you know, forcing themselves to be in situations whether they're healthy or not, and not really recognizing they're causing more damage. Because like you say, when you show up for a relationship, you want to show up as the best version of yourself. And even when you
mhm.
get in that, you want to continue to build. It's not a time to say, okay, I found someone, I don't have to continue to grow. I think that's
Right.
absolutely detrimental to every
I
relationship,
can
you
stay
know.
like this. I don't ever have to
Right.
change.
And this, because you know, some people say, well, I was like this when you met me. Okay, great. But why
Mm,
are you holding on to not growing? You know, what's
right.
attractive about that? You know, so I think it's about being able to connect with someone who has vision for themselves, someone who, you know, does not mind growing, is open to certain things. Because if you get to connected with somebody who's closed minded and you're closed minded, y'all are just stunted, and there's not
Mhm,
really room for you to grow, but you're just constantly experiencing this clash, and there's no
mhm.
fulfillment in that, right? And at some point you're just holding on for the sake of being in something and not really recognizing it's contributing to all these other mental illnesses, all right, that go on, because sometimes you're just in an unhealthy situation that contributes to the very thing that you need to be freed from.
Wow. Now, do you think relationship coaches, or relationship therapists, if you will, is something that people should be more open to? Whether they're single or whether they're in a relationship. And we're in an era now where there's lots available online. So speak to us about that. What resources would you recommend if somebody is in some of the scenarios that we discussed this evening?
I think just being able to look at the resources available to you. I'm not just talking to somebody who just pulled up the mic and said, I'm going to be a relationship coach today. Somebody who's invested in their
Hmm.
training to really be able to support you and give you the skills to be able to do that. But somebody who's always bad mouthing a particular gender, there's no help in that, right? Because they're
Right.
projected off of their own sour experiences. And you can't, like, you don't benefit from, feeding yourself. Because a lot of times people seek support from people who they can identify with. Is like, oh, they're talking about the same type of pain I experience. I can relate to them. And the whole time they're just bashing. There's no, uplifting in any of that, right? So it's really
Hmm.
about someone who can really give you the skills. One of the workshops that I work on is the 7 Principles of Making Marriage Work. That's a book that's available. There's also workshops that's available around that, but it's by the Gottmans. It's a husband and wife team, and they do a lot of really good work. So I'm actually, in the process of completing my certification in that Gottman training, but just looking for someone who has the training to be able to speak to it with some
That's good.
evidence-based experience, and not just, oh, okay, I decided I want to be a relationship coach today, or I decided I wanted to focus on relationships without really that valid, you know, um, research behind it. So
So
just being,
so but so would an employee assistance program, or where would be a good place to start to look in the community?
So you can look through, if you have EAP, so Employee Assistance Program, just looking for people who specialize in what you want to, looking at people who relational therapists, relational coaching, couples counseling, because a lot of times it's people who are single who want to get into those things. That's a thing, and
Mhm.
I'm glad that people are really tapping into that so that they are real intentional about what they're looking for in an ideal partner versus just connecting to somebody just because they're available or they're showing interest. So once you become real clear about what it is that you want and figuring out how you can contribute to that ideal relationship, that puts you on the up and up, and you figure out like you constantly have to do the work to show up the way that you want to. So just looking at the bios, looking to make sure that people have that training that you're looking for. Because some people think, okay, I have a therapist, that's all that I need. If that's not what that person specializes in, is not
That's
necessarily
a
going
good
to benefit
point.
you to the space that you need to be able to do it. So whatever it is that you struggle with, just looking for somebody who has that special training in that area is going to be of the greatest benefit to you.
Mhm.
Oftentimes that may mean the coming out of private pay, but there are a lot of that you can find. There's Psychology Today, there's Therapy for Black Girls. There are a lot of different resources that you could look into, but just being able to filter through and know what you specifically are dealing with, and just being able to interview your therapist. A lot of therapists offer consultations, free 15-minute 30-minute consultations. Gives you time to figure out how you connect with them and if you really feel seen or heard by them, because if you don't have a good vibe with them, it's hard for them to really be able to help you if you're not trusting of them. So
Mm.
that's a very intimate relationship. So you have to be intentional about picking somebody that suits you in order to help, to make sure that you're going to do that work and you're not just going through the motions just because somebody said, okay, get in therapy. You just have to make sure you're with a right fit with someone.
Oh, that's so important. I can see how that would be necessary because I'm not going to open up to somebody that I don't feel comfortable with. And it's a little bit different from a regular doctor per se, because you're only going to spend a little bit of time with them and they're going to tell you whatever it is that you need to do. But a therapist is actually talking about some things that are not tangible, right? That you really need to unpack, and that facilitating the unpacking is how you're going to be made better, right?
Correct.
Oh yeah,
Mhm.
so I definitely see that. Well, this has been a very enlightening conversation, and I know that people will catch the replay and hear some things that will really intrigue them and provoke them to want to do some things even for themselves or to recommend some things for others. So tell us how we can get in touch with you, and what things that you are available to assist with, even online.
Okay, so through Instagram, Tamara Jones Impacts is my handle, as well as my website. Tamara Jones Impacts is my website, which talks about all of my services. But because I focus on relational therapy, all things relating to other people. So even my background is in education. So I spent 10 years at the education level, the high school level, dealing with teens. So teens, that's a sweet spot for me naturally. But also during that time, I did definitely help with parent coaching, because oftentimes we have all these expectations of what the teens should be doing without really understanding how to connect with them. And parents often don't understand how they can be contributing to some of that distress, and making
Mm.
matters worse. So being able to help whatever it is that you're looking for connection, that's what I specialize in. My practice is called Fine Tune Connections, by design. It was like, we want to make sure we fine tune those connections so that you can enjoy those relationships and you're not just trying to survive them.
Wow, wow, that's great. That's great, and so necessary in the days that we're living in now. And I will tell you, relationships are everything. So I can see how families would benefit. I can certainly see how individuals and couples would also benefit. So thank you so much for being on the show today. I just believe that we are embarking upon a season where people really do want to get better. They really do. I think that's another byproduct of COVID, is that, people realize when they were shut down and they couldn't run and they couldn't avoid and they couldn't, that they had some real issues at home. And I know, the statistics have yet to really reveal, all of the things that took place during those 3 years that we have been dealing with this. But I think that, one of the better things that have come out of it is the access to counseling and the importance of counseling. So
Right.
thank you for all that you do. We
Mhm.
appreciate you. So we're going to close out today's session of the living room, and just thank you guys again for tuning in and being in the living room, because it is the place where intimate conversations are life changing. So we look forward to gathering together around some good conversation again. God bless you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.